Hello everyone! This is a series where I talk about people, the good, the bad, and the history, all while making average, non-glamorous suppers for my family of 4. The person from history today is going to be the lovely, the brilliant, the incomparable Hedy Lamarr. Yes. And the meal for today is roast beef, mashed potatoes, and the fixings for my family. Everybody really loves this classic dinner. My mom used to make it every Sunday when I was little. So basically you just start with the oven hot, 350. You spice up your roast. I'm just going to put pepper and garlic salt on this one. And then you cook it at an hour at the high heat. And then you're going to go ahead and turn it down. And then it's just going to roast for 4 or 5 hours at a low heat for the rest of basically the day, or like 4 or 5 hours. Her name was Hedwig Keisler when she was born in Vienna, Austria on November the 9th, 1914. She was the only child and absolutely doted on by her banker father and concert pianist mother, who were both born to Jewish families but seem to have converted to Catholicism later. Although she loved inventions, as her father would inspire her to think about the way things worked when they went on walks together in the city, her real passion was the big screen and the glamour of acting in Hollywood. They were almost society, and Hedy went to a private school to hone her ballet, languages, and natural sciences. But by the time she was 12, she had already won a beauty contest, and at 15 she was forging a letter from her mother to get a job at Sasha Film. This was the MGM of the 1930s silent film world in Austria. So she made her start as a script girl, who is somebody who keeps an eye on continuity, but they're also right there in the eyes of everyone on set, the director, the actors. I think that this was part of how she landed her very first few roles in 1930 and 31. She played extras, she even had a speaking role. And she would meet Max Reinhardt, who was a swanky producer, and he cast her in a play. And he really, really wanted to make her his muse and take her back to Berlin with him. But either way, she ended up choosing to go with a Russian producer instead, who cast her in this film called The Trunks of Mr. O.F. That does not mean swimming trunks. She showed up in one more film in Austria, and then she made her next film choice, which was internationally scandalous. Okay, so Hedy was only 18 years old at this point when she was cast as the lead in Ecstasy. This was a Czech film about a young girl with an old husband, and it showed Hedy, who was still a child pretty much, both nude and in a compromising situation, which made it too much for some countries like the United States, where it was banished. But in Europe, it earned her wild success. Now, apparently she was tricked by the director and producer into disrobing, and they used a telephoto lens, and they may have coerced her into some of the other things as well. So begins a cycle of being used by people. She felt completely duped, and she was scared away from acting as she was starring in a play at the time and was getting swamped by people backstage after the shows. One of those people was Fritz Mandl, the third richest man in Austria, and he would pursue her very hard, eventually win her over despite her parents fearing and disapproving of him. And that very same year, Hedy would marry him. She was then swept away to a castle on the Czech border and kept like a masterpiece under lock and key. Mandl was crazy about buying up all the copies of Ecstasy and burning them up and refusing to let her act anymore. But Hedy discovered her love of applied science again and went along with him to some of his meetings. You see, Mandl was an arms dealer for Mussolini and later for Adolf Hitler. Given the fact that Hedy was Jewish and a virtual prisoner in a gilded cage, she knew early on that she had to escape this marriage. She reportedly had to disguise herself as a maid to get out of the castle, flee across Europe to England. In London in about 1937, she met Louis B. Mayer, who was scouting the talent that was fleeing tight times in Germany and Austria. He tried to get her to sign a contract, but she refused him initially. She was very clever, though. She booked a boat ticket on the very same boat he was on, and happened to negotiate triple the contract. So basically, by the time she stepped off the boat in America, she was Hedwig Keisler Mandel no more. She was now Hedy Lamarr, the most beautiful girl in the world.
Well, shall we all say it together? I think we all know. Girl in the world. Hedy Lamarr.
Hedy Lamarr, right.
She had updated her 20s vamp looks to unveil her Vivian Leigh-esque beauty, transforming from a shy ingenue to a full-blown seductress. The first film she starred in was Algiers, a remake of a solid French film, and the cast and crew gasped when they first saw her on camera. Her beauty was made for the screen, and her pictures were some of the greatest ever. There was A Tragedy with Spencer Tracy, and A Star-Studded Boomtown with Clark Gable, The Glittery Adventure of Ziegfeld Girl with Judy Garland and Lana Turner. See, she was made into this beautiful but vapid foreigner. Now, foreigner she may be, but she was certainly not vapid. Homesick and isolated in her Hollywood home, she began working on inventions in her spare time. Now, it was 1939, and crazy all over the world with Nazis everywhere, and she had just had a baby boy with a man named John Loder, who was a British actor established in Berlin before everything went horrible. They created this love child, but they kept it quiet, and Hedy married Gene Mackey as screenwriter and producer. But this, her second marriage, only lasted 1 year. She was the sultry beauty in White Cargo, again sexualized and given very few lines. She would acclaim that she was paid less because she wouldn't sleep with Mayer at this point, too. But in 1943, she married John Loder, James's father, and they would have 2 more children together, Denise and Anthony. The poor older son grew up thinking he was adopted for his whole life. I think he didn't actually find out he was really their son until 2001. As the war grew darker and the British were trapped behind German U-boats, Hedy was using her natural talents to help solve the problems that the Allies faced. She was desperate to join the National Inventors Council, but it was encouraged instead to use her celebrity to sell war bonds across the country. She did. She kissed this one sailor about 1,000 times, instead of having to kiss like hundreds of strangers, and ended up raising millions in 10 days. She was also consumed with the fact that there was no way of getting to the Allies through the German boats, and with her pianist friend George Antheil, came up with a frequency-hopping spectrum. A web of connections so complex, its actual instrumental use wasn't actually appreciated until now in our Wi-Fi and Bluetooth systems. They use it to great success, but her patent was deemed red hot at the time and kept from her for 50 years. After the war, she left MGM and opened her own studio in 1945, which was almost unheard of. Her marriage to John Loder would end a few years later, and her son would actually be shipped off to boarding school at about 11. It was particularly strange him being so young and then having this fight where apparently somebody slammed a door and then he moved to another family for 40 or 50 years and they never spoke. She would make a few films through her own studio, but my favorite didn't come out until 1948.
What's your name?
Delilah.
It was a Cecil B. DeMille picture, which was like Spielberg at the time, and it was in glorious color, so fans got to see her beautiful blue eyes for the first time. It was the role that was tailor-made for her, and she won critical acclaim for her acting. The success brought her back to MGM to make a few more hits in the 50s, including a western, Copper Canyon, and My Favorite Spy with Bob Hope. At this point, she was on the verge of her third marriage to a Swiss club owner and former bandmate. But, like all the others, she would not be held down. After only a year, Hedy divorced and married for the 5th time to an oil baron, W. Howard Lee. Her glamorous life began to slow down, and her career was setting like the sun. There was some TV roles, but 1958 was officially her last film role. Her marriage to the oil baron was over after 7 years, her longest besides John Loder. And then there was one more marriage to her divorce lawyer, which only lasted 2 years. In case you were counting, that was 6 divorces. That's known as an Elizabeth Taylor. In 1966, she tried to make another film, but collapsed partway through and was replaced by Zsa Zsa Gabor. Can you imagine? There was an autobiography suddenly published right around the same time called Ecstasy and Me, but Hedy went on record saying most of it was fabricated. And I think a lot of it was taken from like an ill-informed magazine article, and it really did her no good. Her past was back to haunt her all over again. The exploitation of men, of her body when she was too young. Then in 1966, she was actually caught for shoplifting.
She really felt misunderstood. Part of it was a shoplifting arrest, which she may or may not have been guilty of.
I mean, who cares? Let her take things. She's Mother Wi-Fi. She saved the world in World War II. Oh. So anyway, her children married well, and Hedy received many scripts and offers, but turned them all down. You see, she was so desperate to hold on to her beauty that she suffered some terrible plastic surgery debacles, and she completely retreated from the public eye in the 70s and 80s, going to Florida and occasionally getting arrested for shoplifting again. It wasn't until 1997, when she was in her 80s, that she finally got some money for that Spectrum patent and the recognition she so desperately deserved. She was still getting like nosed down on though by like real scientists, I guess you could say, because here's the thing, she never once had any formal training in college or otherwise, but she tipped off Howard Hughes to get a better design for his airplane wings. That's why they don't look like choppy little boxed Wright brothers wings anymore, because of Hedy Lamarr. Her last few years were spent hardly seeing anyone, but there were these lovely little clips of her sending little notes and messages to her children over.
The brains of people are more interesting than the looks, I think. And then people have the idea of I'm a sort of a stupid thing.
What was
Different, I guess. Maybe I came from a different planet, who knows? But whatever it is, inventions are easy for me to do.
Hedy passed away in the year 2000 of heart disease at the age of 85. She has been immortalized by her contributions to our world and is now known as the mother of Bluetooth. She had a life that seemed to be tossed around by forces far stronger than herself. She always felt like somebody who never belonged or who came from another world. But I think the world was fortunate enough to have hosted her for as long as we did. And I'm so thankful that she got away from the scary Nazi man. What a class act.
Give the world the best you have, and you'll be kicked into the sea. Give the world the best you've got anyway.
So normally gravy is usually very important in our house, but today I'm lazy, so I'm just using a package. And then I'm going to go ahead and mix it in there, and that's gravy. You put the very swanky sauce upon the vegetables at this point. It's cheese whiz. My kids love this dinner so much, and after all of it is finished, I usually put some of the leftovers into a casserole dish for the shepherd's pie. So I put that meat on the bottom, I put the vegetables in the middle, and then I go ahead and put some of the mashed potatoes on top. That is, if there's anything left. Usually there is. And then that is good for another meal. And it was yummy. Hedy Lamarr, here's to you. Here's to a classy, classy lady. Honestly, I used to mix her up with Vivian Leigh all the time. Vivian Leigh is another classy lady. They had very similar ends, to be perfectly honest. They kind of lost themselves in a lot of their roles, or perhaps it was just the absolute toxic way the studios ran back in those days. This is me forcing my kids to take salad. Anyway, they're very similar ladies. They look very similar, and they were just so graceful and gorgeous and good. I can't even really think of anybody who really compares to these people right now, but see you next time!